It is so good that you are here today. This Mass has been like 3,000 years in the making, at least. You know, it struck me the other day that every time we come to a Mass, whether it's in a big church on a Sunday, whether it's in a school chapel, whether it's in a nursing home dining room, every time we come to a Mass, it's an historical wonder. It's an historical wonder. Let's go back in time a little bit. Of course, when it comes to the story of God's relationship with his people, we could go all the way back, but I want to go back to about 1000 BC, to David the great king, whom God claimed like as a beloved son and one after his own heart. David, who is going to bring all the people of Israel together. And he promised to David that one of his descendants would become king of a kingdom that would last forever. David's son was Solomon, who built Solomon's temple, this great temple, this place to worship the Lord and for the people of Israel to gather in prayer. It was like the center of their whole life. After David's son Solomon, things just sort of started falling apart with the descendants of David. They fell into idolatry, just unfaithfulness. There's some pretty bad actors in this group. Meanwhile, people from other nations were coming to take Israel over, and eventually there would be this exile. We're kind of hearing about this a little bit. It's the context of our first reading today from Isaiah 22. So finally, in 586 BC, we have the Babylonian exile. Jerusalem gets overrun. The temple that was the center of their lives gets destroyed. Anyone who had any kind of skill was taken away to Babylon, which we know as Iraq now. And the whole thing was just a mess. And then that line of David's ruling sons came to an end, 586 BC. So for all these centuries then, there was no descendant of David ruling over the kingdom. But yet they had this promise still from God that one of his descendants would rule over a kingdom that would last forever. So they're probably wondering, like, well, how does that fit with our reality when this whole thing just kind of fell apart? Of course, then we can go to the arrival of Jesus, who came into the world about the same time that 500 years before prophesied in the book of Daniel that in 500 years the Messiah was going to come. So he arrives on the scene, but of course not in the way that people were expecting the Messiah to be. Not as a political or military leader, but as God himself incarnate. Wasn't on their bingo card. And God incarnate, who was going to bring salvation, restoration, freedom, the kingdom, by giving his own life away and then rising from it. The people were starting to piece together, kinda, who he was. We heard last week from the Canaanite woman of all people, "Have pity on me, son of David." The Holy Spirit put that on her in her mind, that he was this son of David. It's a messianic term. It's a term related to the Messiah. And of course, Jesus' big question to his disciples today: who do people say that I am? John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah. Those are three big hitters. One of the other prophets. To be a prophet was no little thing. They were a mouthpiece for God himself, so they put him in pretty good company. Of course, he was more than that. Again, God himself. So the Holy Spirit put onto Peter's mind that you are the Christ, the Messiah, and not only that, but with that, the Son of the living God. Because the Son and the Father are consubstantial, as we declare in the Creed. course, Jesus knows that people aren't going to understand all this, so he tells them to be quiet about it. But we see that God has kept his promise from 1,000 years before to David that he was going to have one of his descendants usher in this true and eternal kingdom, this new and everlasting covenant. We prayed in our psalm, Lord, your love is eternal. Do not forsake the work of your hands. We see the Lord's promises are eternal. And especially in Jesus, he has not forsaken the work of his hands, but fulfilled it in an amazing way. And then not only that, Jesus, he left a church, a new assembly of the people of God. When Jesus refers to my church, he's talking about that kingdom that was promised to David 1,000 years before. And this kingdom, this church, this people, it would have a structure that Jesus would put in place, because this isn't our whole thing at all. But Jesus is the one who established and built and continues to build and sustain his church, which is his own mystical body that he said he would never forsake and would be with always. So we can flash back to our first reading from Isaiah 22, when the enemy was at the gate, and this master of the house, who was like the second in command, literally had the keys to the kingdom, was caught up on his own stuff, And so he gets canned, and they give the position, the keys to this Eliakim, who, it doesn't really matter who Eliakim was, because ultimately he was about this future new master of the house who would truly have the keys to the kingdom. He'd be a sure peg and a sure spot to be a sign of firmness and immovability for the people of God, so they could kind of rally around this guy. What he opens, no one shall shut. What he shuts, no one shall open. And we see all this same language and imagery then with Peter, who he says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Where you bind on earth, we bound in heaven. When you loose on earth, loosed in heaven. So he gives Peter the keys. He gives Peter authority. He's making him the new master of the house, the one who's second in command to the king. And of course, we have a successor of Peter with us still today. The Caesars of Rome, they don't have any successors around. The Roman Empire, long in ruins. The pharaohs of Egypt, there's no successors to them. The King of England, just a figurehead. We have this unbroken line from Peter to Leo XIV, of a successor of Peter in 2,000 years. And all sorts of things have happened in the last couple thousand years. Some amazing works of the Lord, powerful movements, renewal, growth, also some bad actors, times where the whole people in general just kind of had a malaise. But here we still are, despite it all. Because despite humanity's best efforts to ruin the church, it's never going to get ruined, because it's the people of God. It's his mystical body. And his love is eternal. And he's not going to forsake the work of his hands, because he remains faithful despite it all. And so that's why it's 1,000 years after David and to Christ, and 2,000 years from Christ until now. And if 3,000 years, isn't it then an historical wonder that we're here at a mass with a priest who's under a bishop, a successor of the apostles, who's under the pope, the successor of Peter. It was all on us. Again, the whole thing would have crumbled a long time ago. But this is Jesus' church, and how blessed we are to be a part of it. In our second reading from Romans 11, St. Paul is just beside himself almost, in wonder and awe, the riches, the depths of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God. It's unsearchable, his ways, and from him and through him and for him are all things, and to him be just glory forever and completely. Maybe we thought we'd just sort of show up for a Mass today on a random Sunday in ordinary time. But maybe this day we can have the gift of a little bit more wonder and awe, which is, of course, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. To know that in some way that this sort of seems strange perhaps, that this day, this Mass was like 3,000 years in the making at least, that this is an historical wonder because it's the work of God. And we're here to enter into that because we have this God who has been with us in the past. He is with us in the present. He will be with us forever, continuing to build up his body, the church, despite it all, until he comes again in glory.